Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very excited to introduce you our guest today, Adrian. The first question I'd love to ask is, I guess we kind of talked over this, but there's a habit you've been doing for the last 15 years, which you think contributed a lot, I guess, to like your development in like technical knowledge and getting into OpenAI and all that stuff. What is that the habit you've been doing every year for the last 15 years?
I think what you're referring to is a birthday letter that I write to myself. So it ties into kind of this idea that I have that it's very important to self-reflect and to think about changes, mistakes, wins, successes, everything that you've done, and try to think about what you want to do next. And so I write a letter that happens to be on my birthday to myself that I will then read a year later. And in that letter, I outline the goals that I have for the following year and specifically how I'll know if I've reached those goals. So a very important thing for me is to have a specific, almost like KPI or like a specific number, if you will, to say like, oh, I have achieved this or not. And so, past goals have been financial, romantic, work-related, personal-related.
Do you like make it into like, because I personally do quarterly goals. I just saw Jeff Bezos, and it's like three things. One is relationship, one is like career-wise, and one's physical. Like, do you like make it into sections, or how do you go about structuring it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't really do sections so much because I think that what I've seen is there are things that what I want to do year to year changes sometimes. And so I try not to have a specific section. I have previously done something with my partner and some other people where we did a monthly check-in together as a group where we used, I think, one of the, I don't remember the author, but it was kind of a 12 sections of a life. And we would set goals in some of those sections. And we would then check in with each other once a month to see how people's goals are progressing in that way. And I think that lasted about 6 months or a year or something like that. She had previously done it for many years. But I think it just didn't take that well. I think we were also in the middle of a pandemic at that point, and so it wasn't an amazing time for people to have or like to stick to their personal goals, I think. Anyway, but yeah, I think this was related to a conversation we had just earlier about how how I believe that it's important to keep growing.
Yeah.
And that I do a lot of coding and software engineering work, and the like rule I have for myself is that every 6 months I should be able to look at code that I wrote 6 months prior and be just disgusted by it. Like who wrote this? This is terrible. Should be what I think, because I think that I should be consistently getting better and learning more about how to write it, how to better understand the problem that I'm trying to solve and things like this. And I think that that's usually a good, or I find that to be a good goal for people trying to really, be software engineers.
And what's like so when you, outside of just like reflecting yearly and trying to improve yourself every year, how do you go about learning like new programming? Because you're at like in some ways a frontier of AI and other things you kind of, how do you go about learning new things? What's your process like trying to become an excellent programmer? Are there like specific resources you like or what's like, how do you go about programming?
I mean, I think the first thing for anyone in that is to figure out how they learn best. And I think that the way that people learn best varies drastically based on the person. So I have a lot of coworkers and friends that talk about how they read this programming book and that programming book and they liked it or they didn't like it or this is what they learned. And that just really does not work for me. I just cannot make my way through programming books. It's just not how I do things. For me personally, I find it very useful to just build something. And so, for example, right now I'm currently learning about kind of some like desktop development. A lot of the places I've worked at have been web apps for a long time. And it's nice to just get into just some like desktop development. And so I'm doing that just by creating basically I'm building Tetris only on a Mac on a MacBook, just by myself. And so, and the way I'm doing it is through intense usage of ChatGPT. Basically, and so I just figure out. It gives me code. I check to see if it makes sense, and then I put it into my Swift program, and then I try to see if it works, and then we go from there. And so, but for me, that's because I've figured out a really good way that works for me to learn new things and kind of build skills, even if I don't necessarily see knowing how to do desktop development. I don't think really helps me in any way right now. I'm not going to be working on the desktop app or anything anytime soon, as far as I know. And so, I think it's useful to build skills that I find interesting, even if I don't yet see the purpose of them.
And do you think, because you mentioned you personally don't learn from textbooks, do you think have you seen some people who found that to be
for sure?
them?
Yeah. No, I definitely have friends that are very good textbooks learners, and all power to them. I think the important thing is that they have found the thing that really works for them, where they, I know people like this who are able to read like textbook or a programming book or whatever, beginning to end, and then they can go and try something out, based on what they've just read. And I'm just not like that. For me, it's a lot more of an iterative process where I try a little bit. Maybe I'll read a book, but usually I'll read, maybe some guides, some tutorials, so something shorter, and then I'll try something out and try to learn from there based on what I think I need to do next. I'll also learn a lot from other people, see how other folks have done things and things like this. And I don't think any of them are right or wrong. I think all of these are just different ways that people learn. And I think that the wrong thing is to try to learn in a way that doesn't work for you. And I think that's, it's totally fine to find whatever way works for you and go down that way. I find that a lot of people try to force themselves into a specific style of learning. And I think that usually ends up with a low, learning efficiency. I think it's a lot easier to be able to learn if you know learning patterns that work specifically for yourself.
I guess I'm trying to think. While going through your career, you've done a bunch of stuff. You've actually done production, so you were telling me about the backlights and stuff. What would you say? Looking back, because right now, I guess this podcast is a bit unique because right now I just have my college counseling and I'm just applying to colleges right now.
Yeah.
When you were going through your career, how did you decide to do things, and what are some regrets maybe you have about, or maybe regrets and maybe things you did well while you're progressing through your career? Because you've kind of, I guess, in some ways, I would like to work in open AI, like at the frontier. It sounds really exciting. What are the things you've done properly in your career too?
I think a few things. The first thing is I try not to have regrets, because I try to think about, did I feel like I was making the decision? Did I feel like I was making the best decision at the time?
Based on the information you had at the time?
Based on who I was at the time. I think that normally I never have the best information.
Sure.
But, that's just me. But was I true to myself in that decision that I made? And I think that if I can say yes, then it is okay if the outcome is then not the best.
Yeah.
Because we cannot know what the future is. Not only that, but we also don't know. There's a great parable I love. That's Chinese. It's called Mr. Xi's Horse. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
It's you can say it as well. This is a story, if I'm correct. So there's a Chinese farmer, and his son's riding a horse, and he fell, and everyone in the town basically was like, oh, so unfortunate. But then his son was excused from going to the military, and they were so happy, right? But then, if I'm correct, his horses ran away or something, and then everyone was like, the horses ran away. But then the horse brought back 4 more horses.
Yeah, exactly. And so the version I heard was about how his son couldn't go to war, and so that was great. But then all the people that went to war came back and were all really rich because they had gotten plunder, and so that was really bad. But his son couldn't go. And then 2 years later, all the people who had come back and plundered, a new warlord came through and killed them all because they had plundered, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's just this idea that what is good and what is bad is relative with time, and that things that seem bad now may end up being very good later. I remember I've talked to a lot of people that have been laid off at different times, and usually years later they talk about that as being one of the best things that ever happened to them, because they got an opportunity to reset themselves a little bit, and that's not usually an opportunity that a lot of people take. And so being given that opportunity can be very powerful for a lot of people. And I think that idea of what is good and what is bad, we will not know until our deathbed. And so I don't think there's a good way of saying, oh, this was a good thing or not a good thing. I think for me, I just tried to keep doors open because I've generally tried to keep too many doors open and not try to make enough decisions one way or another. And that's kind of been what's guided me. And so, coming out of undergrad, I ended up going into strategy consultancy for that reason. Not because I wanted to be a strategy consultant necessarily, but because I felt like this kept doors open, that I could do a lot of things as a result of doing this. Then when I went to grad school, I thought I was going to get a PhD and go and work in industry for a while and build medical devices or whatever. And then I realized it really was not for me. But I felt like I had kept enough doors open that I could then pivot to a career in software engineering, which I was able to do. And I came out of grad school doing that. And then, I've just kind of been following things that I felt were important. And so, I started working in San Francisco, and I felt like I wanted to live elsewhere as well. So I moved to Germany for a while. And at first I thought this was a really bad move career-wise, but I felt like I also learned so much from that opportunity, from that job. I worked at a small startup. I had to learn a lot of, I felt like I grew as a coder a lot more than I did in other places, for example. And I think it's very useful. Going back to Mr. She's horse, I didn't know what was actually useful to know until years later. And even now, I'm sure I look back sometimes and I can think of reasons why that experience of moving to Germany.
It makes sense all just in hindsight, but going forward, it doesn't really make sense.
There's no way to know.
Yeah.
There are, of course, some decisions that are better or worse than others, but I think that the best thing that we can do is get to a point where we're only picking from good decisions, and just pick one of them.
I found this, didn't Tim Ferriss by any chance?
Yeah.
He had this one decision making, and this I'm kind of found. I think you might like it. It's basically when he makes decisions, he tries to find decisions which gives him a lot of opportunity. But if this thing he's doing doesn't work out, that the skills like continue on whatever venture he's doing next. So it helps. So this isn't a waste of time.
Yes.
I'm curious what you think about that.
I think, first of all, there's always something to take away from whatever experience that you have. And I don't think that any experience, once you're making once you're in the area of only getting to pick good choices, I think the specific experience or specific choice you make matters a lot less than how you respond to what choice you made.
So as long as you don't make stupid decisions like cocaine or something.
Sure. For example, or, if you're forced into making a bad decision, I just don't have the money or whatever. And so instead I need to, work this job that I hate or whatever, because I just need the money, right? If you're not in that kind of situation, but you're in a situation where, okay, I can choose between this kind of job that I like or this other kind of job that I like.
And would you say it's mostly been that case for your life?
I've had a very privileged life to a large extent. I don't think it's been entirely that case, but I have been very lucky. And so I think especially in the last 10 years, it's been a lot more of like good choices that I have to make I have to make choices between two good options. And I think that the important thing is to then react positively to whatever that choice was. So take as much out of that choice as you can. even if it turns out it wasn't the right choice or it wasn't a good choice or what have you. And I think that that's a very important thing in my mind, and that's a very important way to approach life, I think, which is that it doesn't matter how we like move forward or like what exactly we do when we're moving forward, but that we learn and grow from whatever situation we end up finding ourselves in. Yeah.
What would you say personally like motivates you to build all these things? Like, cause it's like it's like a very high performance. You have to perform very high at OpenAI, and like what like kind of drives you to like. You already mentioned this before, like about AI in the future. You see, I love like what do you see in the future of AI, personally?
Well, I mean, I think um, specifically at OpenAI, I think there's some really interesting problems that I see that need to be solved, right? So we were talking earlier about this idea. So I predominantly work on identity at OpenAI, and I see a lot of very interesting problems with identity, right? So as I was mentioning before, you know, not too long in the future, I don't know when, but at some point, we
Like
now
roughly
see.
5-10 years.
I have no idea.
No idea.
But at some point, we're going to have AI agents that take actions on our behalf. And we will somehow need to prove that they are doing what we want them to do and make sure that there is no way for that proof to be fabricated in any way. Because we want, like right now, it's generally all humans that are taking actions. But once you have agents taking actions, and probably multiple agents taking actions on your behalf, you want to make sure that the things that are happening conform with your original wishes. This is an identity problem, an authorization problem, like permissions problem, a lot of different problems. And I just don't think that they're really, really solved yet. We have technologies right now that work, that might be able to be applied in this case, but I don't actually think that we've thought through how they should be applied. And so that to me is a very interesting problem. And it's pretty deeply within my wheelhouse. It's like systems that I've worked on for a long time and things like that. I think more broadly, I see AI as being a very interesting tool that we should try to use. I don't see, Westworld version of AI.
What's Westworld?
Oh, it's this TV show that came out maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I guess now, about a park where all of the actors in it. So this is a like theme park about the Old West, where all the actors in it are robots, and they're actually like AI robots. And anyway, and so the show is about it. Spoilers. One of the AI starts to understand its reality and becomes sentient. And then it's kind of what happens after that. And that portrays AI as this agent that achieves sentience and starts doing things out of its own accord. And I just don't see that as a AI, like a path that AI will move down in the like foreseeable future.
And
Maybe it'll happen. I don't know.
And I mean, you're near a lot of like people very smart in AI. Like, what do you think percentage wise? Because some people are saying that it's gonna be Terminator, it's gonna crumble the world. And
I don't have a good probability here, but
not probability, more like what percent of people tend to like. Do you think it's a split half that people think it's not gonna be? It's gonna happen?
No. I mean, most of the probabilities that I've heard have been like between 5 and 10% or something like that. But I think that that's usually from people that are like very probability minded, and also people that are kind of worry a lot about the AI safety space. But most of the people working at AI companies, I imagine, are pretty okay with pushing forward the frontiers of AI, and that's probably why they.
You mentioned probability thinking. Is there like an issue? What do you think is like, I guess, not issue, but like weakness of probability thinking? Because you're saying most people think this is like a probability mindset. Is there like something wrong with probability thinking?
I just think that so many probabilities are really made up, and I think that assigning numbers to something does not increase the amount of which you know it. I read the Michael Lewis book about SBF, Sam Bankman-Fried, who founded FTX, who was like the prototypical like probabilities thinker, who was talking a lot about like, oh, I assign a like 20% probability of this happening or whatever, and I just think all of those numbers are entirely made up, and I don't think that making up a number does not make you more precise. Anyway, I kind of have a similar critique of like providing story points and things like this when doing the agile process.
What story points?
Oh, so in the like very like hardcore agile method,
What's the agile method?
when people are software engineers, when they're working together to build products in a iterative way, they usually use this mechanism or like this, I guess, work method called agile, where they get together at the beginning of some sprint of a week or two in length and decide what they're going to work on that sprint. And then they give these things called story points to how complex they think a task is out from that sprint. So they take on a bunch of tasks and they see how many of them they can get done. And then at the end, they can total up the story points and then say, okay, well, this sprint we completed 20 story points of complexity or whatever. So this is just a way to like figure out what the velocity is of your team. And I just think that it's very misguided. I think that you're assigning numbers to fundamentally unknowable things, and that you are, and that if when you assign these numbers, you invariably have people look at the end of the sprint and say, "Oh, this sprint was a 20. Wow, that's good. The last sprint was only a 16. So you guys are doing well. Oh, next sprint, oh, you only got 12, but last sprint you got 20. What happened?" And I think that that's you're assigning, you're trying to create knowledge in a fundamentally unknowable thing.
Did you see a Dead Poet Society by any chance?
I have, yes.
I feel like I saw the first when he was showing the poem, like he was making them read, and it's talking about how like the square of the poets of like of this linearization. Is it kind of like that basically?
Yes. I think it's like you're adding. I think that these numbers are given as a way to try to show or like to have a way for non-technical folks to try to have a handle on how fast technical folks are moving. The problem is that it's entirely gameable because the numbers, there is no objective number. And the only objective number exists once you've completed the work and know actually how complex it ended up being. There's no way to know the full complexity until you're fully done. And as a result, I just think we're just making up numbers to make ourselves feel better about a process. Anyway, and so I think that that's a similar critique I have with over-reliance on probability thinking. I think it's totally fine to say probabilities to just clarify your own intent. You know, I have a 20% chance of not waking up tomorrow at 8 a.m., is basically me saying that I'm feeling a little tired and I might sleep, late. But I think that that's very different than, I think there's a 20% chance that I'm going to get, this award or whatever, which is a made up number. And anyway, and so, yeah, so that's kind of my critique generally.
Interesting. I never thought of it like that. Is there like a way you sort of think through things, like when you're trying to, I guess, I don't know if you try to predict things, but when you try to think of the future, like how do you go about thinking about it?
It depends what you mean by the future.
I guess specifically AI.
I just think that I haven't seen AI realistically work that well when it's just left by itself. I think it needs human intent behind it to really work well. And so I think for a very long time, and I don't know, I have no idea how long this time is going to be, but I think for a long time, we're going to have human in the loop as the main method.
Do you think it's at least going to be by the time I graduate college? At least by that time? Do you think there will still be humans needed, do you think?
Definitely.
Okay.
I think you should still go to college, probably. I guess if you want. I mean, it depends what you want to do, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I don't think, I think college is one way to go. But yeah, I think that we're going to have humans in the loop for a while. But I think that AI is becoming a really important tool for us, and I think that we can then do work, especially knowledge work, much faster if we use AI than without it. And I think that as a result, AI just becomes a force multiplier for ourselves rather than, something that completely takes over our jobs.
I guess because if you could help me kind of imagine like this scenario, because a lot of my friends ask, because I interview a lot of AI people, and like I don't feel like AI is doing anything. I just cheat on the school test, and that's
right.
It seems like. What would you say like AI will, if you could help really give really help visualize a world where AI really changes things on a different level?
Sure. I mean, like, for example, you have, a bunch of papers to, like, traditionally you had to read a book and then write a paper about some idea inside the book, right? But thankfully AI has already read that book for you. And so, at the cheating example, if you will, I don't think this is a fundamental change of the world, but at the cheating example, what you end up having is that instead of taking 5 hours to write one essay, it'll take you 20 minutes to write one essay.
And do you think there's a loss in, like, because my teachers, all their critique is basically, there's a loss in like human thinking and that, because it's so much more efficient that people they're not spending as much time with.
Yes, I think if you just do it by itself, but I think that there's a really reasonable critique of education here as well, because I think that for too long, because we didn't have these tools, education, which a lot of it was based on the churning of like unimportant papers, and like not just unimportant but unthinking papers, I think it relied too much on that as just a way to propagate its own system. What I mean by this is there were so many bullshit like topics that I was forced to write about when I was in high school and undergrad.
I can feel that.
Yeah, where I was not contributing anything. No new ideas were being built because of the fact that I had read some book or pretended to read some book or whatever, and then wrote some paper about it. I was just regurgitating for the 19th time the same thing that this teacher had read for the last 19 years they were studying or they were teaching. And so I don't think that it's the case that, we're going to lose so much from preventing students or like from students not having to do that kind of work. I think there's a lot of actual thinking work that we should be providing to students. And I think that, and I do agree with the critique that, you shouldn't have to completely avoid writing things at all. I think it is definitely very useful to write on your own, that being able to do the editing job is hard, but also there's something that you're missing if you never do the writing job. And so I agree with that critique, but at the same time, I think that it's very important to change the assignments given to be a lot more about interesting ideas that students have. And if the answer is, well, they don't have any interesting ideas, then we as teachers are not doing a good enough job of interacting and engaging students to be able to help create those ideas. Anyway,
I guess it's just going back. I mean,
yeah.
This is, I guess my friends say this in like a to kind of trivialize AI in terms of, this is only for school, like that scenario. What other scenarios do you think it can have profound changes on for, like, I guess, normal people who are listening? Because some people, they just like high school students, fellow friends of mine, to help them really like see like the power of AI.
I use AI every day. I'm here in Korea because I'm on paternity leave, and so my 5-month-old is my main job right now, and I asked ChatGPT.
You should put on your LinkedIn
about
baby care.
I will soon. Yeah, I haven't completed the job yet, so there's no need to put it on LinkedIn. I have conversations with ChatGPT daily to ask about different things, as he's growing. How should I think about, right now we're thinking about introducing solid food, for example. How should we think about that? What are the options? Give me, talk to me about that. What are the different things that I should think about between baby-led weaning and, solid foods through purees, for example? And, what are the pros and cons? Give me some studies, things like this. I'm doing some research into this, but I'm not doing it alone anymore. I'm not going and reading different papers, seeing if I can find them on the internet, reading God knows what website. I'm asking and having a conversation with ChatGPT to help understand, which way do I want to move forward with raising my child. And I don't know, I find that incredibly useful. And so when I have conversations with friends and family about this political topic or, that topic or whatever it is, ChatGPT, even more than the internet in some ways, can be really useful at, providing clarity into exactly what's going on. Because I think there's a lot of misinformation on the internet. That's not to say that ChatGPT has only correct information.
Do you think it tends to have more accuracy than mainstream media? Or not mainstream, just like a Google search, or how do you think about
I think it depends on the internet literacy of the user. I think the average user will probably get a better experience, a better result coming from ChatGPT than from their own internet usage. At least this is my perception. At least for me, I find that most of the people that I talk to get a lot of their information and a lot of their feeling of what is normal from social media and related sites. And I think that social media is a terrible place to get truth from. And that's not to say that, again, ChatGPT is necessarily truth, but you are able to, in the way that you talk to it, you're able to force it to show you studies that it has access to, or it's read, to showcase why it believes a certain thing. And using it in that way can be very useful to understand what truth is. And I think that's much better than most social media sites or even frontline articles, which usually I found are very don't really cite the sources that they use, and it's very hard to know how much of this did they make up. I think there's I don't remember the name of it, but there's this idea that we give media news media a pass about all subjects except for those that we are intimately familiar with, and the ones that we are experts in, we realize how bad the quality of media is. And I think that whenever I read stories about computers, computer science, software engineering, AI, things like this in the media, I cringe because they're terrible. They do not have the necessary complexity in them to really describe what is happening in a specific sense. And then I turn the page and I look at a new one and I'm like, oh, wow, this is very interesting, because I don't know nearly as much about that topic as I do the first one. And I think that that's bad. And I think that it is useful to have another countervailing force like ChatGPT or AI LLMs to help with that. And I don't think they still have some issues. There's still hallucinations that happen sometimes, and so you need to make sure you're using it wisely. But I think even so, most of the time, for most basic questions, it usually does not hallucinate. And how should I wean my child into solid food is, I think, a relatively basic question.
Yeah, that you can't really. I mean, it's you can't really mess it up badly unless it's very. Yeah.
Not just that, but also it's literally billions of people have gone through that problem
And have agreed
already.
on it.
I don't know if they've agreed on it. They definitely haven't agreed on it, but they have had conversations. It's a knowable and it's a thing that has occurred to everyone's lives, right? We both have gone through that problem, and so anyway. And so I just think it's just a relatively basic thing to learn about.
Do you think AI will have a more impact on a personal, our personal lives, managing it, or more in economic, it's going to increase the efficiency of this and this, because I feel a lot of people say AI is going to help, like robotics and stuff is going to help create more things, advanced physics, advanced knowledge, inventions. What do you think is going to more affect generally?
I mean, I do think it's going to do both. Uh, so the first thing is, um, I think a lot of science will be helped by this, just because a lot of scientists also do lots of like mundane things. Like they have to take their data and then run relatively mundane like statistical analyses on it. Then we need to interpret those things. Then we need to write emails to people to get them to fund their next,
So those things
thing.
are going to be automated.
And I don't think it'll be
Like,
automated,
partially.
but I think they're going to be like, I think the tool of AI will make them be faster. Take this email. I should be able to, and I think in the next 5 years, I don't know, in the next amount of time, I have no idea how long. I don't like to predict amount of time because I will be wrong. But in the next, like not that long from now, we're going to be able to ingest all of our Gmail history, all of the messages I've ever sent on a Gmail. That way I can get an AI that writes exactly like me. And then I will be able to have it write a lot of my emails based on me saying, things like, I need to write
I was
a
actually
grant
working
proposal.
on something like that personally because I was like, I want to make sure people, I like the way I write.
Yeah.
I like carefree, like,
Yeah.
like very, but it's like, it's hard to do it all the time. So I've tried
Yes.
making one. So it's interesting. Wow.
And I think it's going to be, not very long from now, it'll happen where it's like, where this is just a product that exists. And one of the things I will be able to say to it is, I need to write a grant proposal and send it to these 12 different places. Take my last research paper, explain it in an easy way, write it in my style, and then send it to these 12 institutions. And, I think AI should be able to do that for us. This is what I mean by, I think like there's a lot of mundane drudgery in, science and other things, right? Like friends that are postdocs or doing research or whatever, I've seen them slave away over slide decks for many hours. And I think that that's important. It is very important. But I think that we're able to, and one of the reasons why it's important is to help elucidate our thoughts more clearly. But I think that we can elucidate our thoughts not just by trying to write slides, but by having a conversation with an AI to try to explain exactly how and what we mean. And I think that that'll make the process of clarifying what we were trying to say, and frankly, like clicking a lot of buttons on PowerPoint, much faster. And I think that's the promise. I think it is just a shovel for our mind in some ways.
Shovel for our mind.
So the shovel is just this tool that we created that helps mechanical work go faster. And I think that like AI is similarly like a shovel that just helps our mental work go faster. And so I remember this idea that there's, like we basically convert energy into productivity gains, right? So we've converted energy into like burning stuff to get electricity, and then electricity makes our cars go, so we can like move things more, go around, like we can move products faster, we can move information faster, whatever it is. And I think that AI is just the next step in taking energy and converting it into productivity gains for ourselves, for like ourselves as humans. And that's kind of what I see as a promise of it.
Like it's just something I was just thinking about.
Yeah.
While you were saying, it's just you said you recently had a kid, right?
Yeah.
It's weird because a lot of people I interview who are AI people, for some reason they had kids recently. I don't know why, but I feel like maybe it's some way connected to like AI, like conscious being, like they're creating a biological conscious. It's an interesting correlation I found, but like
I just think it's just an age thing.
age thing. Oh,
Like I think that most of the people that I've seen, like OpenAI, for example, has a pretty strong bias towards highly, to high density, high talent density. And what that means is that they hire generally pretty senior folks, and pretty senior folks usually take some amount of time to get there. And if you spend 10 years in an industry, then you're roughly about the like childbearing age these days. Like people these days generally start only having kids, in their 30s or so. And I think that's roughly when most folks that are, like pretty senior to be able to work in most AI companies end up like getting into AI companies. And so I generally see it as an age thing rather than a like people believing in like, trying to create a consciousness of their own as a way to like understand how AI works.
You traveled like 50 countries. I'm not sure how much you traveled. Around 50.
Yeah, something like that.
And I'll talk to you, and this is the first thing you kind of mentioned is, what's your favorite country? And I was expecting like a country like, I don't know, like Japan, or someone said Taiwan, or someone said Australia. We just said Iran. Curious what you mean by that.
I just find that Iran was just the space between being a tourist and the local population was very thin there. Like because we don't have a lot of tourists, they're not used to annoying tourists being annoying, right? And so the people there I found to be incredibly welcoming and kind and friendly. And so I actually got adopted to some extent, where I was trying to ride the subway in this small town, or not small town, it was not Tehran. And I didn't realize the subway was just opening. And so actually it was free to ride. And I was there trying to buy a ticket. And the guard who was like at the booth was trying to say like, no ticket. But I was just like, no, come on, like sell me a ticket. And someone just stopped randomly and said, oh, no, it's okay. You don't have to buy a ticket. It's totally fine. Just like, come on, come on. And so, he knew a little bit more English, so it was easier to communicate. And we just got to talking, and he was like, oh, like, where are you staying tonight? And I'm like, oh, I don't know yet. I'm going to go, like, I know there's a few hostels over here, so I'm going to go check them out and see which one I'll go to. And he's like, oh, why don't you come to my house? And just, come, I recently got divorced, so why don't you come by and, we can hang out. I was like, oh, okay, sure, great. And then, we got to talking some more. He was a mechanical engineer. We were just talking about kind of what he did, kind of his job. And we kind of hit it off a little bit. And he's like, oh, actually, it's my sister-in-law's birthday party tonight at my parents' house. Why don't you come? You can meet her and my brother and our parents. It'll be great.
Were you a little like afraid when because I feel like, I don't know if the culture, I heard in the Middle East, it's like the culture is very opening, but people are not as used to it in other cultures where they don't usually invite them to their house as much.
Obviously I had a little bit of trepidation just to be like safe and what have you. But I felt like he seemed to be a really genuine person. And I felt like it didn't seem like it was completely impossible to be for this to happen. It didn't feel that bad. And so I decided to, of course, some may think like, oh, you're a pretty like risky person. And I probably have like a little bit more risk tolerance than some other people might. But it seemed like he was just a genuine guy, and he was. And so I ended up going that night to their party, and we hung out. There was some dancing involved, there was some music. It was great. It was a really nice experience. And I think that the core cause of it is that like normal people, just everyday people, are very open to people from the outside. They're not used to having just hordes of tourists coming, and thus being a little bit pessimistic about that. And so they're very open. And I found that really nice. Just that kindness I saw in so many places. I was in Tehran for the New Year, and it was a big celebration. And there's a kind of a block party every place where because this is Ashura, they do parades and other things. And we just got pulled in. I was staying at a hostel, and the hostel owner just pulled us into his friends' celebrations. And so we walked in their parade. We kind of did various things, and it was just so nice to be so welcomed and brought into the experience. they really were happy to share it with us. And that's something that I have experienced in other places, but it usually takes a little bit of digging to get to kind of normal people's lives, because you have to go a little bit outside of a tourist bubble. And I just felt like there was just no tourist bubble yet in Iran. It's not that easy to go to. It's not a very high tourist destination yet. With all the sanctions, I actually had to bring in all the money that I needed as cash with me, because there were no ATMs that were going to work in the country or anything else.
I heard they use like crypto, like they use some blockchain as well. They use Tetron.
Oh, maybe. I'm sure you're probably right about that. When I went in 2017, and so I think that it was a little bit early in the Bitcoin craze, and so I don't think the infrastructure had been set up yet. But I'm sure you're probably like, this is a pretty good use case for Bitcoin and for crypto generally, to get around, I guess, or to not heed international sanctions. And so, and like do something that, the credit card companies can't do. But yeah, like in every country in the world, you can go now, other than a few, you can go now put your plastic card into a slot and get local money out, and you just can't do that in Iran and a few other places. And I think as a result, it just makes it harder to be a tourist there, and so it still feels
which
really,
is so like, it's like Tehran is like, I mean, because my grandfather's Persian, so it's like I feel like I need to go there, and also it's like so much of history is around like in the early history is from Middle East, and it's one of the core places,
Yeah.
It's like,
oh, they're beautiful places there. It's just because of current political and economic challenges, it's not a tourist destination, and so just as a result, it's still so nice to travel to because of that. And so I had a really good experience. Yeah.
I guess another question which is I already asked, but it's like is books or resources that you'd recommend, like you tend to recommend to a lot of people?
Yeah, I was actually reminded about this the other night, which is this. I first saw it as a video, but it's actually based on a book. The video is called "The Rules for Rulers." It's by this YouTube creator called CGP Grey, and it's basically a summary of this other book called The Dictator's Handbook. And I've watched both the video, which is like 20 minutes, and I've read the book, and they present a very interesting mental model for how power is accrued and works in the world. Like how just because you have power doesn't mean you are able to use it in any way you want. It kind of asks the question of why aren't there more benevolent dictators, for example, and like why do rulers always seem to be bad or corrupt or whatever you want to say. And I find it's a really interesting lens to look at power through. And so I actually recommended to a lot of people as just an interesting way to kind of think about how like political power especially kind of works in the world. And so, I would recommend that.
I'm just curious, AI companies, right? It's like, it's a big thing, and it's going to change the world in some ways. And do you think that the similar, like, I guess, how do you say it? The politics and the power structures, I mean, they're going to have how immense of a power do you think AI companies will have in the near future? Do you think it's going to be because you believe it's not going to be like a absolutely like world changing in terms of like Terminator scenario, but like how much do you think they'll change the world, and how much? Because I remember Sam Altman, he also mentioned like, you should not trust me, like you should not trust anyone necessarily in this scene. Like, how do you go about seeing the power and the play of like all these AI companies? I mean, I don't know how do I form this question?
I mean, I think that there's a few interesting like confluences that are coming together here. The first is there's a ton of AI promise, but there hasn't yet been a lot yet of AI delivery, right? So I think a lot of the things that we've been talking about today are like future facing, like, oh, write my emails for me, or do this or do that, right? Like, we're not that far away. We can already.
Is the only real limitation hallucinations right now for those things?
I don't think so. I think the quality is
Okay.
sometimes there, sometimes not. Just, like the quality of how it's saying and how it's responding and how well it understands. Like, for example, when I write code, I really need to read over the code that ChatGPT gives me because it's frequently wrong. And so that's just a limitation of correctness. And so, yeah, so I think there's the component of, the confluence of like, okay, well, how much promise are we actually meeting? The other one is that I think that we're probably going to have more regulations on AI than we did with social networks. I think essentially we didn't really have regulations on social networks for a very long time, and I guess we still don't, at least in the US or generally globally. And I think lawmakers are going to see the problems with that and thus do more with AI. I also think that probably if we really build a Terminator AI by accident or whatever, I think that most of the AI companies will probably get nationalized. Like, I think the US is going to take them over. Right? And so, like,
because it's like national
security, yeah. And not just US, right? Like, every country that has AI companies will probably, right, because it becomes an existential threat. Anyway, and so, but I don't know. I see that as being a very unlikely event, I guess. I think more likely we will see incremental gains in productivity.
And do you think the companies are just going to be like one monopoly, or is it going to be there's going to be a lot of competitors? There's going to be one.
I hope there's going to be a lot of competition. I think that the network effects that we see in social media that causes agglomeration, we're probably not going to have as much in AI.
And if I'm correct, network effect is just, but basically it's like a moat for the company. By the more people they have,
right,
it's harder to replicate.
Like a social network is better the more people use it, right? And so, because a social network is all about not just me, but are all my friends on it? And if all my friends are on it, that's better for me. And so, if all my friends are if every person I know is on this one social network, I cannot reasonably create a new social network, because then I'll have to convince all my friends to come to it. And I just don't see those kinds of network effects in AI yet. Anyway, there is a data effect of knowing, okay, this is what our users will ask for, but I don't know if it's quite the same at the same level, and thus I can see more competition, where
But certain companies, like I guess Tesla, they have some advantage in terms of like AI, in terms of like vision, because all of their Tesla cars have trains, so they just have like 100 times more.
Yeah.
Google just has more search data in terms of queries.
Yeah. So I think data is probably going to be, I think we're finally finding ways to use data in an economically positive way, right? Like, I think we use data a lot until now as like a way to advertise. And I think now we're finally starting to unlock data for the sake of data, right? And so I listened to a recent interview with the CEO of Getty that does images, and they're talking about how they're trying to fine-tune an AI with their own images. That way you can then create AI-generated images, but that are more correct or more true to life, or what have you. And so I see that also being a possibility, where maybe you take the base model from, an Anthropic or an OpenAI, a Google, whatever, and you as a company layer on your own set of data. And your data makes this be your secret sauce, right? And so I can see that as being a very reasonable play for companies to do in the future. And I know, and I've heard of a lot of companies that are looking at doing things like this, where you do a lot of fine tuning with internal company data. Yeah.
Yes. Another question I was thinking of is I guess the softwares I build and the little startups I build, I feel like you could just summarize them as just saying a GPT wrapper in some ways. Like, it's the common AI startups. Like, it's not the AI startup. It's just you just connect to GPT and API, simple requests. That's what a lot of. And what do you think a lot of AI startups right now, like if you could say something, is like how they can prevent themselves from just getting like over, like how can they, what are mistakes that some people who are trying to build AI startups are making in terms of like, oh, I'm building this, but like for example, there's this one AI that helps with like writing or something, but it's like it seems like AI can help a lot of that. Like maybe OpenAI could just replace it. They have a marketplace where you can train custom ones. Like
Yes.
how do you think you should build an AI startup to make sure you're not going to get overrun? Like you're in a unique position.
I mean, I think that you need to make sure that the value you provide is not just a very good prompt. And what I mean by this is you need to have a user experience where the use of AI makes sense for whatever it is that you're.
Are there some realms, maybe some ideas you have, like just based on just living, like some things that you think AIs would really help with that you don't think are being implemented?
So I've recently seen this really cool app. I was talking to my partner about it before. Actually, was a journaling assistant app where you have a conversation with an AI to help you journal more effectively. So instead of just saying, "What are you doing today?" or whatever, it asks follow-up questions like, "Oh, like what's top of mind for you right now?" And you say something like, "Oh, like I'm looking forward to lunch with my friend." And then it asks like, "Okay, well, what about that lunch are you most looking forward to? And is there something else you'd want to do, to help you have more of these kinds of lunches or something like that," right? I don't know exactly what it will ask, but you can imagine something like that. And it helps you kind of go down the path of having a very personal but authentic journaling experience. And so the usefulness of that is not just that you're providing a like prompt wrapper for ChatGPT, but that you have a user experience that in this case happens to be like very tightly tied with a AI LLM. But most importantly, the user experience feels really nice. And I think that's the very useful thing. That's a value add that I think apps should be, or like products should be trying to add, which is how do I provide a user experience that makes a lot of sense for someone, right? So I recently saw that the Microsoft Teams has added some functionality where they automatically provide a summary and set of action items at the end of a meeting. And so obviously this uses AI, but the nice part about it is just how interwoven it is into a product that you already know and use. And so without doing anything else other than recording the meeting or whatever, you are getting all of this additional usefulness out of a product.
And you don't need to download another software to do it on top.
Exactly. Like it just kind of works. And so the nice part again is just you have a really magical user experience where now tied to your meeting is a summary of what you talked about, meeting minutes and a set of action items automatically coming out of it. And I think that's the kind of user experience that is adding value rather than just something that wraps ChatGPT that maybe when ChatGPT or Claude or what have you gets better will just subsume because now you don't need the prompt, right? Like I kind of believe that like prompt engineering is just a mark of bad AI quality, right? Like it should be able to understand me without having to write a long paragraph of like, here's my prompt or whatever.
Or I heard this is one way AI is, so it helps you basically clarify it. Like if you give it a prompt, it's like, oh, I don't understand this, help explain this for me. So it like helps you clarify your own question.
Right.
Yeah.
AI should do that. We shouldn't have to like do prompt engineering, right? And I think that as AI quality increases, we'll probably have less prompt engineering.
So you think prompt engineering is like a gimmick? It's just like
It's not a gimmick. It's like a band-aid that we need to use right now, I think. And I think that as our LLMs get better, probably we should have less prompt engineering. And I think we've already started seeing that, where I think you had more prompt engineering in like GPT 3.5, for example, than GPT 4. I think, yeah. Anyway, and so I think you had more prompt engineering for DALL-E 2 than DALL-E 3, like when generating images or what have you. And I think that, as we have less need of it, we should have AI that like fills in the gap, because you don't need to be specifically like very precise or whatever. Anyway, yeah.
What is like something you bought for $100 or less that you think has most meaningfully changed your life?
Ooh. For me, it was I think a Kindle. I think that I use my phone too much, and having a non-phone like e-reader has been like, yeah, I've had it for a long time, and it's been incredibly useful to get me to consume better kinds of media than what my phone encourages me to consume. And so I think that was very useful for me for a long time. Yeah, and I can't, yeah. And at least for me, I know some people really like the feel of paper and all that stuff. I don't really care about that, but yeah, I think a Kindle was very.
Okay, and the last question is, if you had a billboard, like a massive billboard in the highways of Seoul,
Yeah.
probably maybe not Seoul because they don't understand English, but in America, what would you write on the billboard?
It's a good question. I think that no, I have something. I just need to figure out the right way to phrase it. Basically, the idea that I think nuance is everything, if you will, which is in itself a little bit of an oxymoronic statement. But anyway, I think nuance is a very important. Nuance and complexity are really important things. I think that there's lots of energy and movement and action towards a specific voting outcome, for example, and then that vote or whatever that outcome is happens, and people are like, yeah, we did it. But then the devil ends up being always in the details of like, oh, how are you actually implementing this thing that you passed or this vote that you did or whatever? And those details, the nuance, the complexity of it is really the important thing. And I think that I feel like there's an things like nuance are underrated. Of course, it is more difficult and more challenging to understand, but I also think that is where the important details live. And so I think that something like nuance is everything is a pithy version of this message.
I think that was like I think just from my programming, just like I'm nowhere near like your skill level, but like from the few like programmings I've done, like I think the biggest thing I learned is just like, because people make a lot of decisions like about politics, about life in general. It's like when I do coding, it's like slightest like weird, like if I just make a little like write the text or the variable wrong, or just like a small mistake, like it makes it not work anymore. And I feel that translates to like, because I see my friends and they make a lot of like statements, they make a lot of decisions about a lot of things. It's just like they're based on like very like not very like there's a lot of not firm ground. There's details that are like missing. It's like, oh, this variable doesn't exist in your argument, or like I don't know. It's just interesting.
Yeah,
it's like
yeah.
Because in coding, it was just so much bugs, like so much.
Yes.
Would you say most of your coding is fixing bugs sometimes? How much would you say is
No.
fixing issues to creating?
I think it depends on the job specifically, but I think that generally I would spend no more than 30 to 40% of my time as a software engineer writing code. I think that the hardest part of being a software engineer is knowing what code to write and not actually writing it.
What do you mean by that?
I think the writing of code is a smaller part and is relatively straightforward to knowing what code to write, what problem to solve, how to solve it exactly, and how to change the system to get it solved are the hardest parts. Once you've figured those three out, actually then having the code there is, I think, more straightforward. But it is those first three that I think are the hardest components, and why I spend usually, when I'm writing code, when I'm doing this professionally, I spend 60 to 70% of my time at least doing those three.
I mean, I guess this is my last question. Just reminding me, because while we were talking, you said it's very interesting. I've never heard anyone say this, that a programmer, which I always thought of more as a like technical, logical, nothing in relation with like the humanities of writing, which you said it's much like
Yeah.
coding is. What do you mean by that?
I think that there are a lot of ways that coding is like writing. First, that I think it's very important to do pretty regularly to keep getting better at it. That you're never a perfect writer and you're never a perfect coder. There's always improvements you can make. I mean, the other thing is also the complexity of writing code and the difficulty is not getting the machine to understand what you want to do. It's getting you or somebody else reading this code 3 months from now to understand what you meant and how you were trying to do it, to convey your ideas to a future person. That, I think, is the hardest part. And I think that's very similar to being a writer. You're trying to convey your ideas, whatever your idea is, be it about a fictional novel, nonfiction book, whatever. You're trying to convey your ideas to some audience. And I think coding is about conveying your ideas, your intent to a future reader. And I think that's the hardest part.
Well, Adrian, I'm so thankful for you for being on the pod. And ladies and gentlemen, this is Adrian. You can follow him on LinkedIn. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.